BlackBerry was once worth $80 billion. It controlled half the US smartphone market. And then it lost almost all of it in about 5 years. This is not a story about Apple killing BlackBerry. This is a story about BlackBerry killing itself. Let's go back to the start. 1984, Mike Lazaridis and his childhood friend Doug Fredgen founded a company called Research in Motion in Waterloo, Ontario. Not a phone company. Not yet. RIM's early business was unglamorous and boring on purpose. Point-of-sale terminals. Wireless modems. Pagers. The kind of stuff nobody outside the industry has ever heard of. In 1992, a Harvard MBA named Jim Balsillie almost bought the company outright. Instead, he invested $125,000 and became co-CEO. RIM had 14 employees at the time. Lazaridis ran the engineering. Balsillie ran the deals and the carriers. It was a genuinely good split, and for over a decade it worked spectacularly. By the mid-2000s, the BlackBerry was everywhere that mattered. Wall Street. Capitol Hill. Every executive's hand. It got the nickname Crackberry because people genuinely could not put it down. The killer feature was push email. Your message just showed up the second it was sent, no refreshing, no waiting. Nobody else had that. And the physical keyboard let you type faster than anything else on the market. By 2009, RIM was named the world's fastest growing company, with earnings up 84% year over year. At its peak, BlackBerry held around 20% of the global smartphone market and over half of the US market. This company was not some sleepy incumbent. It was a juggernaut. Then, January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs walks on stage at Macworld in San Francisco. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone, he said. And then he held up the iPhone. Mike Lazaridis was at home on his treadmill when he saw the broadcast. According to people who were there, he was genuinely alarmed. He could not figure out how Apple was pulling off a full web browser and rich media on a phone. Balsillie was not worried at all. He reportedly told Lazaridis, quote, "It's okay, we'll be fine." And BlackBerry's own chief operating officer publicly dismissed the iPhone as having rapid battery drain and a lousy keyboard. And here's the thing. They weren't the only ones who got it wrong. Microsoft's CEO at the time called the iPhone overpriced and predicted it would flop. Basically everyone running an established phone business looked at this thing and saw a toy. So why did the people who knew this market better than anyone get it so wrong? There's a name for this kind of mistake. It's called the false consensus effect. You assume everyone thinks the way you do, so you can't imagine the world working any other way. BlackBerry split the smartphone market into two neat boxes in their heads. Business users who wanted security and keyboards. Consumers who wanted entertainment and pretty design. They genuinely believed those two groups would never merge. They were catastrophically wrong. The same person who needed secure email also wanted to watch videos, browse real websites, and take decent photos. Apple understood that a phone could be both. BlackBerry never did, until it was far too late. And here's the part that actually surprises most people. The iPhone launch did not kill BlackBerry overnight. Not even close. BlackBerry kept growing for years afterward and stayed profitable. 2 full years after the iPhone shipped, BlackBerry still controlled half the US smartphone market. So if the iPhone didn't kill them immediately, what actually did? This is where it gets interesting, and where most retellings of this story get lazy. RIM's answer to the iPhone was a phone called the Storm, released in 2008 on Verizon. Its big idea was a touchscreen that physically clicked when you pressed it, trying to fake the feeling of a real keyboard. Internally, BlackBerry reportedly called it the Apple killer. It was, by every account, a disaster. By 2009, almost every single Storm phone that had shipped needed to be replaced due to defects. Verizon was furious and wanted RIM to pay roughly $500 million to cover the carrier's losses. BlackBerry negotiated it down to free repairs, free upgrades, and a pile of complimentary phones, still costing over $100 million. And here's the detail that tells you everything about what was wrong inside the company. Lazaridis did not see the storm as a failure. He saw it as a promising first attempt and pushed forward with a storm too. Carriers had already lost interest by 2010. This is what people sometimes call the inventor's dilemma. Lazaridis had built his entire identity and his company's success on his own engineering instincts. Walking away from that wasn't just a business decision for him. It was personal. Meanwhile, BlackBerry made a series of decisions that look, in hindsight, less like strategy and more like panic. Apple had one developer platform, so BlackBerry decided it needed several. Apple kept its interface simple, so BlackBerry bolted on a card-based interface borrowed from a dying competitor's operating system. They were reacting to Apple instead of deciding what BlackBerry should actually be. Every move was defensive. None of it was a vision. Let's talk numbers, because this is where the story stops being abstract. In 2011, BlackBerry pulled in almost $20 billion in revenue. Its stock hit an all-time high of just over $32 a share that August. That same year marks the start of what people in the industry now call BlackBerry's darkest stretch, roughly 2011 to 2016. In the UK alone, market share went from 33% at the end of 2011 to under 18% just 2 years later. By 2013, BlackBerry's global market share had collapsed to somewhere between 0.5% and 1%, depending on whose numbers you trust. That same year, the company reported close to $1 billion in losses in a single quarter and cut 40% of its workforce. BlackBerry tried one real comeback. BlackBerry 10, launched in 2013, was actually a solid piece of software with genuinely good features. It was also roughly 5 years too late. Nobody was waiting around to see if BlackBerry would eventually catch up. The company put itself up for sale that same year. Lenovo reportedly looked at it. So did its largest shareholder. Nothing closed. By 2016, BlackBerry announced it was getting out of making its own phones entirely, handing the brand to a Chinese electronics company to license going forward. For context on just how total the collapse was, by the end of 2016, Android held about 85% of the global smartphone market and iOS held about 14%. BlackBerry's share at that point barely registered as a number at all. So here's what actually killed BlackBerry, and it's not the lesson you'd expect. It wasn't one bad product. It wasn't even really the iPhone itself. It was an engineering culture so confident in its own technical answers that it couldn't recognize when the question had changed. Lazaridis kept defending 4 pillars he believed made BlackBerry unbeatable: battery life, network efficiency, security, and typing speed. Every one of those was true. None of it mattered anymore, because the market had stopped asking that question. Steve Jobs wasn't an engineer, and that turned out to be an advantage. He wasn't attached to any specific technology, so he could ask what people actually wanted their lives to look like, then go build whatever technology that required. BlackBerry asked a narrower question. How do we make our existing customers' existing problems slightly more efficient? That question has a ceiling. Apple's question didn't. If you're building anything right now, in tech or otherwise, here's the actual takeaway. Being right about your product's strengths is not the same as being right about the market. BlackBerry was correct about battery life, security, and keyboards 4 years after it stopped mattering to most buyers. The companies that survive disruption aren't the ones with the best specs. They're the ones willing to ask whether their specs are even answering the right question anymore. BlackBerry never asked that question until the answer was already obvious to everyone else. That's the real story of BlackBerry. Not a phone that lost to a better phone. A company that fell in love with its own answers and stopped checking whether the question was still the same one. Subscribe for more of these deep dives. See you in the next one.